I stood on the veranda of my house, staring off into the empty patch of grass while smoking a cigarette. There was nothing, just a large patch of green. I used to see children playing soccer or throwing a frisbee around, but lately there's been less kids. No one's interested in going outside anymore, not even my own daughter Susie. Susie used to love to play outside. She would run around the open patch of grass without a care in the world. Sometimes she would even roll around in it. Other times, she would simply lie down and stare up into the clouds. But that was a long time ago. Susie doesn't want to go outside anymore. It seems that none of the kids do. We live in a relatively small estate. There's only approximately 80 houses. It's a very quiet neighborhood. Nothing interesting ever happens here, but that's why a lot of parents like it. It's a safe place for their children to live in, but it's also very boring here. There's nothing to do outside and nowhere to go. The nearest shopping center is about a 15-minute car trip away. Some of the parents have sent in complaints and suggestions to the owners of the estate, requesting some additions to the open patches of grass. Maybe add some real soccer goals or even a playground. The owners soon acknowledged these suggestions and announced plans to start construction on a playground in November of 2016. That was 2 years ago, and construction ceased to commence for a very long time. Everyone just forgot about the playground after a while. Technology consumed every household in the estate, just as it has for the rest of the world. So naturally, the owner saw no reason to build a playground if no one was around to use it. That's the reason it was so peculiar, just to see it suddenly appear out of nowhere. 3 months ago, I walked outside onto my veranda to smoke a cigarette, as I do every evening. I stared out at the patch of grass as the bright orange colors of the sunset filled the sky. And there it was. Sitting in the middle of the patch of grass was a series of fences. There was nothing inside of them, but there they were. I didn't think anything of them at first. The next day, as I was out on my veranda, I stared out into the patch of grass again. There was now wooden beams inside of the fenced-off area. Is something being constructed? I asked myself. The next day, as I smoked a cigarette and stared out onto the patch of grass as per usual, I noticed something new within the fenced-off area. There was now a seesaw and a set of swings. Is the playground finally being constructed? I pondered. Over the course of the next few days, the playground was slowly being built, bit by bit. People other than myself began to take notice. They asked the owners of the estate about it, but they claimed they had nothing to do with it. They said they weren't the ones building it, and yet the playground continued to develop over the next few weeks. And soon enough, it was complete. The finished product was a small but sturdy playground. It had a seesaw, a set of swings, a little cubby house, and a slide. All the basics of a playground. Despite the playground being finished, no one knew who actually built it. It didn't matter though, because it was enough to finally get the attention of at least a few children, and it pleased me to see them playing outside on the playground whenever I went to smoke. Everything was well for the first week. Children were finally playing outside again, and the parents seemed to be pleased about the addition of the playground. Everyone was happy. That is, until the first child went missing. It was reported that a young boy named Jeremy disappeared. He was last seen at the playground. Thankfully, it didn't cause a panic throughout the neighborhood at first, and children continued to play outside. A few days later, a second child disappeared. Another young boy named Daniel, just as Jeremy had. He was last seen at the playground. This soon caused panic throughout the estate, and authorities were now getting involved. My son would ask me if he could go outside and play, and I would respond, "No, it's too dangerous." The panic in the neighborhood escalated after 2 twin sisters went missing, a week after Daniel disappeared. The twin sisters were last seen at the playground. The police commenced a thorough investigation, trying to get to the bottom of the disappearances. However, after 2 months, there were no leads to the missing kids. I still go out and smoke a cigarette on the veranda every night. I still stare off into the patch of grass, but I don't see kids playing there anymore. But I still check every day and night, just in case. I remember one evening while I was staring at the playground smoking my cigarette, one of my neighbors walked past my house. We chatted for a bit. We mostly expressed our concerns about the recent disappearances. She told me that she was planning to move out in order to keep her own family safe. I told her that was a smart decision. My neighbor then asked me how my own daughter, Susie, was doing. "Oh, Susie's doing just fine. She's really getting along with her new brothers and sisters." "Oh, I didn't know you had more children," my neighbor said in surprise. "Yeah, 3 girls and 2 boys. I was about 8 years old when this happened, but I can still recollect every chilling detail. I moved to a new town, one that was much nicer, cleaner, and quieter than the town that I lived in prior. Not the sort of place that you would expect to have things wrong with it. There was a very big public park right in the center. It housed rows upon rows of swings, slides infested with snake-like tunnels that weaved in and around the playground, providing a maze for children to lose themselves in their games. There was even a functioning merry-go-round which always seemed to be slightly turning, inviting the children to hitch a ride on its platform of twirls. I have to emphasize on the fact that it was a quiet, peaceful town, the kind of town where kids could leave their house on their own and take the short journey to the park. I had been given strict instructions by my parents that I should come home the second it started turning dark. My life was wonderful, or so it seemed. It was a Friday. I know it was because I remember coming home with a big smile on my face, as I knew I had the luxury of non-stop playing for the next 2 whole days. I did what I always did. I took my school bag on my bed and was ordered to change my clothes. In a matter of minutes, I was ready to descend into the world of fun. Nothing could stop me. The tunnels were my favorite. It was always easy to get lost in them, which made them ideal for playing hide and seek with my only 2 friends, Billy and Tom. They were both in my class, and we, like many 8-year-olds, loved any game that filled us with pure adrenaline. We were going to play murder. I don't expect anyone to know this game. We made it up. The rules were very similar to hide and seek, except when the one seeking found you, they had to murder you. It was only pretend, obviously. It was nearing winter, as I remember being slightly cold as I wormed my way around the tunnels, furiously trying to find the perfect hiding spot. Billy was the seeker, and Tom had hidden behind the merry-go-round. I was alone. It must have been maybe 10 minutes, which for an 8-year-old felt like a year, when I decided to do what kids do when they get bored. Give up. "I give up," I shouted, my voice echoing through the tunnels. "I'm in the tunnels. I give up." I then suddenly heard shuffling from one end of the tunnel. I don't know why, but I froze still. I didn't call out again. I just waited. Something wasn't right. Billy would always say something before coming in after someone in the tunnels. He'd always congratulate them on being the last to be found, or for cheating by hiding in the endless maze of tunnels. As I stood frozen, the shuffling grew louder. I could tell that it was starting to get dark outside, as the tunnel slowly began to become darker. I began to shuffle backwards, but the shuffling ahead of me grew louder, as if someone or something way too big for the tunnel was trying to navigate around. "Come out. It's time to go home now." A very creepy voice echoed in the tunnels. It sounded like when a grown man talks to small children. This was definitely wrong. I probably would have come out if the voice was outside, but it wasn't. It was inside the tunnels. Why would an adult crawl inside? As I was shuffling further and further back, the face of an old man appeared in the darkness ahead of me. Patches of hair on his head and the definite look of someone who hadn't showered in at least a week. I couldn't see what he was wearing, but I knew that it was old, tattered clothes. He had a sharp, scraggly beard which was peppered with dirt. The second we made eye contact, he just smiled at me, revealing his filthy, unbrushed teeth, which had blotches of brown and black covering them entirely. I panicked. I turned around and began shuffling away as fast as I could on all fours, the commotion behind me growing louder and quicker. He was chasing me. I sped through the maze for what felt like an eternity. I only stopped when my legs refused to move any further. I had taken so many twists and turns that even I was completely lost. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to talk," the voice echoed. I could tell that he was nearby. I pressed my body against the bottom of the small, narrow tunnel and listened. He continued to make soft, cooing noises, begging me to come out and present myself to him. I laid in that tunnel for hours, no exaggeration. Even after I heard him curse to himself and angrily force his way out of the maze, I continued to wait. Thoughts raced through my mind of me coming out of the tunnel, only to be met by that same disturbing smile. In the darkness, I could make out flashing blue lights coming from outside. I heard frantic voices calling 3 names repeatedly. Billy? Tom? Michael? When I heard my name, my heart slowly began to calm down. I easily shuffled out of the tunnels, guided by the wet dirt scrapings along its walls, the way the man must have gone. Outside, I was greeted by several police cars, lights flashing, and a group of adults with concerned looks on their faces. I recognized 2 of them, my parents. "Mom! Dad!" I wailed, crying as I ran to them. They lifted me off the ground and hugged me so tightly, I felt as though I was being slowly crushed. Billy and Tom were taken that evening. Their mutilated bodies were later found in a nearby ditch. They had been brutally murdered. Their skulls were caved in with a large iron bar, and their bodies had deep cuts everywhere. Large pieces of glass were found buried in their backs. What chills me to the bone is the wet dirt I saw in the tunnels wasn't entirely dirt. Some of it was Billy and Tom's blood. After slaughtering my 2 best friends and making eye contact with me in that tunnel, he just smiled. He had won the game.
There's always a reason to be afraid.
I'm a 14-year-old girl, but when I moved into this house, I had just turned 12. The house was fine, and was very quiet since before this I had lived with a ton of family, but now there were only 4 of us. We moved in the day after Thanksgiving, and it felt great to have my own room that I didn't have to share with any cousins or siblings, so I spent a lot of time up there basking in my newfound alone space. Let me emphasize this. When we moved in, I felt nothing. No presence, no spirits, nothing paranormal, nothing off. That is, until December rolled around. The first week of December is when I felt it for the first time, like I was being watched by something. Like when someone stares at you in public, and you have that instinct to look at them, that's how it felt. I always felt watched in my room, to the point that I hated being alone up there, and spent all my time in the living room or in my parents' or brother's room. The first week goes by, and I try to ignore the feeling. I chalked it up to me being paranoid because it was a new house, but still, the thoughts stayed in the back of my mind. Finally, I told someone who may have answers for me, my aunt. She's my mom's sister, and she has always believed in the paranormal for as long as I can remember. She got me into it for a while before I stopped believing. I believe again now, because this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. She explained that it was probably a nice spirit watching over the house and, hopefully, me. I hoped that was the case, and in a way, it was. Over time, I would feel it any time I entered my room, and especially when I was trying to fall asleep. It creeped me out so much, and I just wished that it would go away. Then it went from watching me to making contact. One night I was home alone because my brother and parents were visiting Santa, and I didn't want to go that year because I felt sick. I was in the kitchen making hot chocolate when I felt breathing on the back of my neck. It was hot and made my hair stand up. I froze in fear and stood there until the microwave went off. When it began to beep, the breathing faded away as if whatever were there had just walked off. I made the hot chocolate and sat on the couch. I was so freaked out that I was just there staring at the TV in shock until my family got home. Worst part is that I could still feel something staring at me, and this time, it wasn't in my room. Finally, the week of Christmas came, and the excitement made me forget about the incident prior until it happened again. Me and my mom were hanging out in the kitchen when she turned around to answer a question that my brother had asked her. I felt the hot breathing on my neck, and this time it stayed there longer. I froze again, unsure of what to do. I panicked and got up and went over by my mom, who was very confused. After that, I felt the breathing constantly, even on Christmas while opening gifts. It lingered. I finally got fed up one day while sitting in my room. It became less scary and more annoying. I said something along the lines of, "Stop breathing on me," and it stopped completely, and I was shocked. I didn't think it would actually work. After that, I began to have the same dream, but slightly different, every single night. It would begin with me at some park that I've never seen in my life, and me and this boy sat on a bench together. We would begin to talk, and it was actually quite peaceful. We would just converse and stare around at the people walking by. He had brown hair and brown eyes, and was really tall compared to me. I'm about 5'4", and he was like 6 feet. The dream would end, and I would never remember anything we talked about, just that it was a good dream. Flash forward to right after Christmas break, a friend, let's call her Danielle, came over to spend the night. We both heavily believed in the paranormal, and she decided because of this whole watching and breathing thing that she would bring her Ouija board. I had always heard different things about them, but decided it was worth a try. We began talking to the thing that watched me, and the reason I knew this is because it always had this very specific energy. I knew it because, like I've said this whole time, he was up my butt. We first asked what his name was, and he replied, Nolan. I was pretty shocked that the board actually worked, and I was pretty mesmerized. I then asked if he was the boy that I talked to in my dreams, and again, he said yes. I was pretty happy that he was nice, because before, I was quite terrified that he was a demon that wanted to eat my bones, but was relieved when it was just a 15-year-old boy. He then said he doesn't like summer and prefers winter, which explains the only appearance being during winter months. Cut to next December, the watching and breathing had stopped during March through November until it began again, only this time stronger. He began screwing with me. He would open cupboards that I had just closed, or move things that I put in specific areas, only to find them in strange places far from their original area. I always knew that this was Nolan, who I had begun to call Noel. Time went on and the dreams became more vivid, and I remembered the conversations that we had, and it was still nice. Nolan became a good friend, even though I couldn't see him. That December came and went, and now we cut to this year. This is where I wish that Nolan never existed. So because of financial issues and other problems, my dad's family had to move in, my grandparents, aunt, and cousin. And me and that cousin were never super close. I'll call him Connor. Connor was super annoying. He always made messes that he never cleaned up. He never did chores, never did or went to school, and would do stupid stuff for attention, yet he always got what he wanted. By now, I'm 14 and Connor is 12. December rolls around and I'm excited to talk to Nolan. Me and Danielle are still friends and do weekend Ouija sessions with him. So we're home alone, me, Connor, and Danielle, and we decide to introduce Connor to Nolan. So we set up the candles and everything and begin. Things are going smoothly, until Connor starts calling Nolan names. He was saying some pretty mean stuff too. Me and Danielle were trying to get him to stop, but nothing was working until Nolan got really, really mad. Doors began slamming open and shut. Cupboards were going nuts. Our TV was flickering channels, and the windows sounded like someone was beating on them. Finally, I looked into the doorway to the hall, where everyone's rooms were besides mine, and there was a tall figure standing there, not moving, as everything went haywire. I screamed and said goodbye, standing up. Danielle was yelling for Nolan to stop, and Connor had begun to cry. Finally, I screamed for him to stop, that he was scaring me, and the figure disappeared, and the cupboards shut along with the doors. The banging stopped, and I just sat on the floor sobbing. Danielle wasn't crying, but I was terrified and just stood there silently. Connor didn't say anything either, but continued staring at the floor with tears in his eyes. Finally, our parents got home, and me and Danielle went to my room while Connor went back to the basement where he stayed with my aunt and grandpa. Danielle had fallen asleep, but I couldn't, so I began talking out loud as I felt Nolan was in the room. I started saying how it wasn't okay that he had really scared me, and I felt the breathing on my neck. Finally, I fell asleep, and things were fine. I dreamt about him again, and all was normal. About a week after that, Connor wanted to talk to Nolan again. Apparently, Nolan was giving him nightmares. Ones where he was chasing him throughout our house, trying to kill him. Nolan would scream about how Connor needed to leave me alone and stop bothering me, or he would kill him. Connor was obviously terrified, and wanted to say sorry, I guess. I'm not sure, but me and him sat down with Danielle's board, which she had left the week prior, and we began to talk with him. Nolan kept spelling out things like murder, angry, and my name over and over again. Our candles went out and knocking began on the window behind me. It went very slow at first, just a simple knock, knock, knock. Me and Connor froze. I couldn't move and I didn't want to turn around. Finally, I told Nolan that I was scared and that he needed to leave Connor alone and stop. The knocking stopped, and the board spelled out, sorry, then, Connor bad. After that, Connor decided to call it quits and go to bed. I decided to go into my room and try to talk to Nolan again. I started by being nice and asking him to knock once for yes, two for no, something that we usually did. But he got angry fast. He started to bang on my walls at the mention of Connor. My lights went out, and so did my TV. The banging was loud, and if I'm honest, it was terrifying. He was throwing my pillows and banging on my windows, like the night that Danielle was here. I was crying so hard that I could barely breathe and was hyperventilating and sobbing so hard that I could barely talk. Nolan stopped after I let out a strangled cry for him to leave me alone. After that, he stayed away, for a day at least. The next day I woke up, and the Ouija board sat in the middle of my room. I kicked it hard and walked downstairs. I was eating at the kitchen table talking to Connor about the night before. He said he had another dream about Nolan, except it wasn't a nightmare. It was exactly like mine in the park. They talked. I'm still confused about why Nolan would do this. I felt breathing on my neck while eating and basically told Nolan to screw off. I was still mad at him from last night. He did pretty quickly. I didn't feel him for a while, until last night, when Danielle came over for a sleepover and I decided to talk to Nolan. He obviously wanted to talk, so he sat up in my room, and he came through faster than I've ever seen. Now what happened next is what I really need some answers for. We began talking and he spelt out sorry, but then he did something I've never seen him do. He spelt out love, and I honestly don't know what that means. He would emphasize it, and barely answer any questions after that. Danielle then made the mistake of bringing up Connor. Nolan got pretty mad, and started to bang on the walls again. I yelled at him to stop, and he did. I didn't say anything after that. Today I called my aunt for advice. She said he may just be an overprotective spirit, but I'm not sure if that's the case here. I don't know if Nolan is bad or not. He isn't to me, but he is to Connor and sometimes even Danielle, but never to me. All I know is that I won't be talking to Nolan for a while, a really long while. And even now, while typing this out, I can feel his breath on the back of my neck. I totally forgot about this happening until my mom brought it up at dinner tonight, and now it's 9:30 at night and I'm scared all over again. This was back in high school, either my freshman or sophomore year. I missed the bus, and I didn't have a car at the time, so my mom had to drive me to school. The road my tiny neighborhood, more like a glorified cul-de-sac, was off of was a long stretch that had only one equally tiny other neighborhood and a few houses here and there. It was 6 a.m. or something and still dark outside, and it was colder than a witch's tit. As we were pulling out of the neighborhood, my mom and I both saw these 3 children in blue and white private school uniforms standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder at the entrance of the neighborhood on the sidewalk. It was either 2 girls and 1 boy or 2 boys and 1 girl. I didn't remember the ratio, but the girls wore a blue and white skirt/dress outfit and the boy wore a blue short-sleeved shirt with khaki shorts. This was weird for a few reasons. 1, it was 40 degrees outside. They looked like they were dressed for the summer, and they didn't even wear coats or anything. Secondly, there were 2 schools in the area, but not a private school till the next town over, and the blue and white weren't the school's uniform colors. Third, what young kids just stand there in a single file line not doing anything but staring? No joshing around, no nothing? Yeah, right. Lastly, this wasn't where the bus stop was. It was a few blocks down. Just a sprinkle of extra creepy on top. There weren't any streetlights. They were just standing there in the dark, not doing jack except for being creepy as hell. They were on the corner on the right, closest to the passenger side where I was obviously sitting. And of course, we were turning right. As we got closer, I thought that at first they didn't have faces, but it was just too shadowy and dark out, and the headlights only shone under their shoulders, which is how I can remember the outfits so vividly. Then we got closer, and I was relieved to see that they did have faces, but then got completely freaked all over again when I saw that their eyes were all black. Like supernatural Sam and Dean fighting demons, all black. My mom saw it before I did, and she put the pedal to the metal and hightailed it out of there. I remember trying to look back and see them, but I couldn't since it was too dark. My mom didn't go back home until the sun rose, and it was bright enough to not be afraid anymore. Of course, no one believed me at school, and my siblings thought we were just full of it, but we know what we saw. We never saw them again after that, though. I thought that they were spirits, but after a few months, I heard about the black-eyed children on YouTube, or something that made the connection. We moved shortly after that due to unrelated reasons. This was 3 or 4 years ago, and I had blissfully forgotten all about it until my mom said, "Hey, remember when?" And now I want to die. I hope that my irrational anxieties and fear around children that are small enough for me to punt across the soccer field is amusing at least. This story took place in the mid-2000s in Malaysia, when the Nokia 3310 was still a thing and teenage idiocracy was the ruling personality. I was only 14 at the time, and while introverted, I had a group of friends who were mostly in their late teens and early 20s. While this may seem unusual, it is somewhat common for Malaysian teens to have friends with considerable age gaps. One day, this group of friends decided to visit some abandoned flats and condos from a failed development project. The reason? They wanted to try their hand at ghost hunting. Not wanting to be called a coward, I naturally took up on their little excursion. It was planned that we would visit these supposedly haunted buildings on a Thursday night. The night rolls around and there we were, 20 people including myself arriving at the abandoned flat. The flat, darkened by grime with windows missing, presumably detached by junkies to be sold for some small change, loomed over them. Group by group, we entered, flashlights drawn. As I recalled, it was around 10 p.m. Slowly, we made our way up the floors, exploring each unit, calling out to whatever might be residing there. The men's group had splintered into their respective groups, their hushed conversations, callings, and the occasional bouts of snickering and laughter echoing throughout the apartments. I stayed close to my group, not taking the chance of losing sight of them for even a second. For about 2 hours we were exploring, calling out to whatever ghosts or spirits we believed were making this flat their home, but we received no reply. At this point we were tired, bored, but most importantly, hungry. After a couple of calls between the heads of each group, it was decided that we would end the night and go have something to eat. So off we went, a small convoy of cars to the nearest restaurant. As we arrived and settled in, again in our own little groups, we ordered our drinks and food and started shooting the breeze. The topic about the abandoned flat was initially on the table, but was quickly dismissed since we never found anything interesting or experienced anything ghost-related at the location. That is, until one of the restaurant servers marched up to our table. His face was stern, and he was pointing at the younger kid who was sitting quietly, minding his own business, and he asked, "Who are you?" No reply. Again he asked, in a louder, more demanding tone. At this sudden outburst of questioning, we were all stunned, and had our focus to this server and that kid who was still keeping quiet, with his expression blank. The server turned to all of us and asked, "Where were you just now? Where did you drive from?" A guy from my table told him that we had just left that location. The server looked at us, and still with his eyes on us, pointed to the kid he was questioning, and asked all of us, "Do any of you recognize this kid?" 19 pairs of eyes shifted toward the quiet kid, and it hit all of us at once. None of us knew him. We made a head count and totaled 20 heads, including this kid. My group leader asked the kid's group leader if he recognized him, but he said no. "But you drove him here, right? You were with him, right?" they were asking. "Yeah," he said, "but I don't know this kid." At that, the server turned to the ashen-faced group leader and told him that his friend was still at the flat. He said, "You go return this thing, and you find your friend. Only you and your group. The others cannot come unless you want someone else to be switched." We shifted in our seats, and after what felt like an eternity, the guys at that kid's table got up, went to their car, with the kid following them without asking or invitation. Even after food and drinks arrived for the remaining men, any appetite that we had before had dissipated. The rest of the story was told to me by my friend who heard it from the group leader with the quiet kid. When they returned to the flats, they swept through each floor, every unit, and every room, looking for the missing kid. The thing that switched places with the kid? The entire group dare not look its way, as it tailed behind them while they searched. They felt its presence as they climbed the floors, sensing it growing more and more incensed as they neared the top. It took them about an hour before they found who they were looking for, passed out in a room on one of the upper levels. When they found him, they felt the malicious anger of the presence vanish, and then they mustered the courage to look over their shoulder. The kid was gone. They didn't hesitate in getting themselves out, not even bothering to fully awake the passed-out kid and ask about his condition. One of the bigger guys grabbed him and they all ran, each of them praying to whatever they believe in to protect themselves from whatever resided in that abandoned flat. They got to the car, practically throwing the kid they found in the back seat, and after the engine sputtered to life, the driver buried his foot into the gas pedal and they sped away. As I recall all of this, I remembered a conversation that I had with one of my Malay friends who is a little serious on matters of the occult. His stance when it comes to them: we don't disturb them, they don't disturb us. So don't go snooping around in their territories. I'm a die-hard agnostic skeptic with an open mind. I believe that anything is possible, but I want a logical and preferably scientific reason behind that anything. The last 10 days, however, have been absolutely insane. It started when I was a little kid. In my memories, I see kids between the ages of 5 and 11 with solid black eyes and smiles too big for their faces. I had a bad childhood, so I just figured they were added memories by an imaginative mind, because that's the answer that solidly fits my skeptical scientific worldview. Last month, I started seeing a girl. She told me about her experiences with sleep paralysis and shadow people. I explained to her that it was a rational experience caused by being in a hypnagogic state. Then she brought up the Cheshire Cat kids. Her recollections matched mine as a child. It was unnerving to say the least, and she and I spent almost an hour discussing the most minute details about them. Our stories matched. So, she does acid with her friends about 10 days ago, and told me that she stepped outside. A group of 6 of them were waiting for her. They showed her scenes from my life that were my darkest. She described them to me too accurately for her to have heard them from a second-hand source, which would be hard to do anyway, considering that I don't like sharing such detailed information. They then told her that I was going to die soon, and that she should stay away from me. This has put a monkey wrench into one of the most promising relationships of my 25 years. Since that night, I have nightmares of them coming into my room, licking my forehead, and showing me the memories of my past as if they were happening in that moment, complete with smells, sounds, sights, etc. I have written this part off as my subconscious mind reacting with my long-dormant PTSD, but they got more and more vivid. While this is happening, she has been distancing herself more and more. Last night was the weirdest part of the tale, however. I was driving down a windy country road to calm myself, and a pair of headlights flies from around a bend and runs me off the road, almost into a tree. When I looked, however, there was no car, and the headlights extinguished after passing me. I'm chalking all of this up to anxiety-started delusions and possible schizophrenia, but I cannot explain how she knew what she did, and why all of this is suddenly happening. This happened about 7 years ago, and still creeps me out. My husband and I were living in this little above-garage apartment that only had like 4 little rooms. It was built in the 1920s. There were a lot of strange occurrences in the apartment before this event, but I thought nothing of it. My husband was in college at the time working on his associate's degree. Neither of us was working. I had no cell service at this point, and my husband's phone was our only real working phone. I had a phone with no service on it except for an internet service called Magic Jack, so that I could call out when he was in class in case I needed help. If it went to voicemail, it would record everything. This is important to this story. One morning, he calls the Magic Jack line to check in on me. He heard the line pick up, then nothing but static. Next morning, my husband had woken me up before, as usual. It was a day off for him. He wakes me up in hysterics. Something had been captured on the line. He played it for me. There was a very clear growl, and then a voice saying what sounds like, "Leave," very gravelly and angry. Up until this point, my husband didn't believe in the paranormal. He was made a believer that day. Have any of you had something like this happen to you before? How did it change your outlook on the unknown? At the time when this happened, I was around 12 years old, living with my mom in a rundown apartment complex. The building we lived in was the smallest of the three in the complex, and it was shaped like an L, with our apartment being closest to the inside corner on the shorter side of the L. To our right was one other apartment with another single mother and her son, who was much younger than me. Below us was a family with 2 kids that I was friends with, and the apartment above us was empty. It wasn't the nicest area, so after dark we kept our windows and doors closed and locked. The reason I'm going into such detail is so that you can understand why I believe that this voice didn't come from anywhere other than in our apartment. We were up late one night. It was around 11 p.m., and my mom was looking at something on her computer. She and I would typically stay up late hanging out together, so this was completely usual behavior. The computer was tucked into one corner of our quote-unquote dining room, basically just a patch of linoleum off from the kitchen, and our living room was to our backs. We didn't have the TV on, nor did we have any other lights on other than the one in the dining room itself. I can't remember what we were looking at, but I do recall this sudden feeling that we were being watched. Many things that I attribute to unexplained paranormal activity happened while we were living here, so the feeling of being watched was incredibly uncomfortable, but not anything out of the ordinary. As I was beginning to shift in my seat to turn and look around, we both heard a sinister male voice say, "Meow." Conversation level, neither a whisper nor a yell, drawn out in an exaggerated, almost lilting tone, as if it were mocking us. I would say it took around 2 to 3 seconds for this voice to finish, and in that time I was able to feel every hair on my entire body stand on end. We immediately spun around, me nearly falling out of my chair to the floor, both of us nearly hyperventilating in absolute terror. My mom said something about, "If you aren't good, get the fuck out," or something to that effect. I'm honestly not sure how I slept that night, or any of the other nights we were there for, but we never heard anything like that again. Although I've had several paranormal experiences in my life, I was always a skeptic. I try to debunk my own experiences. Like, what if I was just tired? There must be a logical explanation. However, this experience made me a believer. A few years ago, I visited my friend who lives abroad. We decided to go inside an old amusement park that had been abandoned years ago. As a kid, my friend had visited the place every week, so it was pure nostalgia for her. We snuck through a hole in the fence and entered the park. The place was taken back by nature, mostly overgrown and with small, swampy little puddles everywhere. We were nervous about snakes hiding in the grass, and about the big pack of feral dogs roaming the property. But the paranormal hadn't crossed our minds. Upon entering the park, the dogs barked at us, warning us to leave them alone, so we avoided the area where they were and went on exploring. We seemed to be the only people there. After a good 30 minutes or so, we stumbled upon an empty karaoke bar. The place felt off somehow, not like the other buildings we encountered. My friend explains that this building is not what it seems. Karaoke bars in her country are often a cover for alcohol consumption, which was illegal back then, and prostitution. She doesn't recognize the place, which is weird since she spent a big part of her childhood at the park. We figured that it must have been a bit hidden away from the crowds, since it was most likely linked to illegal activity. The moment that we entered the building, my attention was immediately drawn toward a creepy door with a broken glass panel. You could see that there was nothing on the other side, but somehow the darkness behind the door seemed more solid than the door itself. I stared at it for at least a good 15 seconds before I tell myself to stop freaking out about a door. While we explore the first floor, I hear footsteps right behind me. Thinking it was my friend, I turn around, ready to make a stupid joke about her creeping up on me, but she isn't there. I see her at the other end of the room, at least 8 meters away from me. I chalk it up to weird acoustics and don't tell her about it. Do you know that feeling you get when people are staring at you? That's how the second floor felt. It was as if we had walked into a crowded room, except that no one was there. Like on the first floor, the darkness of some unlit areas somehow seemed too dark, more solid. I became increasingly nervous, but I didn't tell my friend since I didn't want to sound crazy. Soon, my friend stopped in her tracks and said that she wasn't comfortable exploring any further. She later described that room as a quote-unquote black hole. She recalls feeling as if all her movements were slower than normal and as if her brain were foggy. This was right above the door that freaked me out so much. Back on the first floor, we feel silly for even being that nervous, and we try to overcome our fears. I decide to open a door adjacent to the freaky door, which was easier said than done. The door was stuck, and I had to put my weight behind it to get it to open. We caught a glimpse of a small storage room before the door was slammed shut again. We almost made a run for it, but since we stubbornly didn't want to give in to our fears and be wusses, we took a few more pictures of the room before we left. Once outside, we rationalized it by saying that it must have been some sort of animal, a stray dog maybe, but we were not convinced. Opening the door took some strength, so what animal could have closed it with such force? There was barely any space between the open door and the wall, so I doubt that it could have been a person hiding there. We talk for a bit to lighten the mood, and we feel braver now that we're outside again. We decide to visit her favorite attraction next, the pirate ship. In the past, it would swing back and forth, but now we couldn't get it to move no matter how much we tried. We both pushed against it with our full body weight, but the ship just wouldn't budge. We take a few photos while we chat about my friend's memories of the park. All of a sudden, the pirate ship begins to move. Slow at first, so slow that I thought that I had imagined it, but then it started to swing more clearly. Since we don't feel the creepy vibes that we felt at the karaoke bar, we decide to stay and watch. After a few minutes, my friend remarks that we should head back soon, since she wouldn't want to be in this place after dark. Immediately after those words left her mouth, it got darker, as if it were suddenly twilight. Remember the dogs who barked when we entered the park? They had been quiet since they realized that we were not a threat. But now, they go wild, barking and howling in the distance. My friend and I don't hesitate, and make a run for it. We run through the dark, overgrown park while the dogs go crazy. It was surreal. Once we reach to the hole in the fence, we crawl out as fast as we can, and suddenly, we feel safe again. I swear, once outside, the sun was shining bright. We looked up to see if it was just a well-timed cloud that had moved in front of the sun, but we couldn't see anything. To this day, my friend is convinced that something told us to leave, since it got dark right after we decided to go home once it was getting dark. I don't believe in these kinds of theories, but feeling-wise, it genuinely felt as if we had went through some sort of gateway when we entered that area. As if it was its own little world. The contrast was just that big. Back home, we talked about our experiences. Apparently, we both felt uneasy in the karaoke bar long before we actually voiced those feelings. I told her about the creepy vibe I got from the door, and showed her a picture that I took of it when we first entered the building. She tells me she felt the same thing, and took a picture just before we left. Upon comparison, we realized that the door is cracked open a little bit in my photo, but in hers, it's half open. These photos were taken 5 minutes apart, and it seems very unlikely that someone snuck in to open it while we were on the second floor. The dog pack was in a different area of the park, and there was no wind that day. I don't have an explanation, but given our other experiences at the park, this creeped me out even more. Like I said, I have experienced strange things in the past, but nothing like this. In the hour that we spent at that park, I went from a skeptic to a believer. I would love to go back someday and see what happens. So this happened a few months back when I happened to be in the bathroom. I was singing that Willow Smith "Wait a Minute" song to myself, minding my business, you know. I got to the point in the song where she quotes a phrase said in the Avatar movie in their language. And while I'm singing it, I'm thinking to myself at the same time, I wonder what that actually means translated into English. And as I finished singing the line, simultaneously trying to recall what it translated to, a female, disembodied voice said, "No, you can't." I shut up immediately and paused for a second, shocked. It sounded as if someone were speaking into a tin can, but very clear and only a few feet away. I left the bathroom completely weirded out, and after a few minutes I remembered about wanting to know what the phrase meant. I googled it and found out that it meant "I see you" in English. I was, and am, still blown away by this strange experience. It's been 4 or 5 years since my last encounter. I think I'm safe, right? Wrong. I moved last year and I recently thought, hey, remember those kids a few years ago? Funny, they can't get you now. Boy, was I ever incorrect. I live on a mountain, and like an hour away from the beach in a super populated neighborhood with my roommates. 2 chill lesbians and a college dude. Super cool people. I think nothing can hurt me now, because there are people everywhere. But no, I'm stupid and jinx myself. I was home 2 days ago. Class was canceled, and the dude of the house was home too and taking a nap. I'm in the kitchen watching Netflix and doing homework when there's a knock on the window. Obviously, this is weird as hell, but I have weird as hell friends. Maybe one of them are trying to scare me. I brush it off and continue what I was doing, and then it happens again. Once again, I brush it off because maybe it was the snow if it wasn't one of my friends. Things like this happen all the time with them. Well, it goes on for about 10 minutes, and I'm kinda starting to freak out. My friends don't have this much patience. I go to Charlie's room, the guy, and wake him up. I'm not the one that's usually riled up, so he's concerned too. We both go to the window. I have my phone out with the camera and 911 within a touch, and Charlie has a bat. We look out the window, and no one is there. After a minute, we calm down and go and sit in the living room. Charlie's mom is a cop, so he says he'll tell her about it later. We think we're okay, so we chill and watch TV together. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rings. I go and open the door. At first, I don't see anything. Then, down on the bottom of the stairs of the apartment, I see 3 young boys dressed in black hoodies, jeans, with brown or black bangs. At first I didn't move, I was frozen in place. Then Charlie asked who it was, and I came to my senses and got a good look at the kids, then slammed the door shut behind me. I started bawling, and I mean sobbing. I had no clue what to do. Charlie's freaking out because I don't cry, especially in front of people like that. He ran to the door with the bat that we have on the windowsill and looked outside. He saw them too. He started freaking out because he didn't know what to do, so he started yelling at them to leave. He said they started smiling. I was crying even more now, and he was still screaming, and I think the neighbors wanted to call the cops. Now think about this. He didn't know what they were. He thought they were normal kids that had scared me. He didn't see their eyes yet. I started yelling at him to go inside when I hear a bunch of footsteps running up the stairs and Charlie screams and runs in. He's telling me he saw their eyes and that they were black, and now we're both freaking out and grabbing kitchen knives. Eventually we calm down and look outside again. No one's there, but we can see a group of kids past the complex with 3 that we think might have been the BEKs. I told him about the other thing that happened to me, and now we're scared to be in this house. We told the other roommates, and they thought we were high or something, so once again, no one believes me. This happened about 3 days ago, and I've been on edge ever since. I work in an Alzheimer's unit. Most of the residents don't stay around for very long because they're on hospice, so basically I barely get to know them, and before I know it, they've passed away. One resident we had did not have dementia, but schizophrenia. Her sister stuck her in there as more of a convenience for herself rather than considering her sister's mental health. The resident was extremely bright, and remembered silly things that even I couldn't recall that had happened. Once COVID hit, she decided life wasn't worth living, and that she would never get better. She starved herself to death. It was heartbreaking, and she suffered many delusions and manic episodes during her last days. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened the month following her passing, until the fire alarm went off out of nowhere during lunch. My coworker and I immediately went to guard the outside doors since they would unlock automatically once the fire alarm was triggered. We assumed it was another drill and were annoyed that it had happened at such a busy time of the day. On my way to the back door, I popped my head into each room just to make sure that everything was clear. When I came to that empty room, the minute that I opened the door, it was frigid. I assumed that it was normal since the room was empty and thought nothing more of it. I stood by the back door and waited for the alarm to stop. My boss came back with a concerned look on his face and told me that the alarm system said that it was coming from the room where that resident had just recently passed. I explained to him that that would be impossible because I had just checked and there was no sign of a fire. The alarm continued to go haywire for another 30 minutes, even when shut off. It was extremely bizarre. Afterward, I had asked out loud if it was our resident who had just passed, and it felt like a warm bucket of water was dumped over my head, and I couldn't resist the urge to cry. The kind of crying and sobbing that hurts your entire body. Sometimes she opens the fire extinguisher box to remind me that she's still around. You need a key and a strong arm to crank that box open. Anyway, I found it open again today after doing rounds, and was reminded of this experience. When I was 16 years old, I'm female by the way, my friends and I decided that it would be fun to go out to an old abandoned farmhouse that was rumored to be haunted. We didn't really believe in ghosts at the time, but were fascinated by the thrill of potentially experiencing something paranormal. So on a hot summer night in July, we decided to take 2 cars out to this abandoned place. There were 6 of us in total. It took about 45 minutes to drive there, so we left around 2:15 a.m. because we wanted to arrive at the farmhouse by 3 a.m., witching hour. To get to the house, we drove down a dark, winding country road with houses few and far between. There were no streetlights, so although it was a warm summer night, it felt incredibly scary as we drove through the unfamiliar place in the pitch black. As we arrived at the house, I nearly felt sick to my stomach. I didn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal at the time, like I said, but something in my gut just felt wrong. The house was situated at the bottom of 2 hills, and there was no driveway in front of it, so we had to park at the top of the hill where there was an area off to the side of the road covered with crushed rock. We got there just in time to fulfill our plan of arriving at witching hour. As we walked down the hill, we saw the house. It basically looked exactly how you would picture an old abandoned farmhouse. Exposed gray wood, pieces of siding falling off, and old, overgrown plants all around the entrance. There were 2 levels to the house. The first level had 2 windows on either side of the door, and the top had 3 windows, one to the left above the door and to the right. As we walked closer, we saw that the door was open, so we dared each other to go inside. We formed a line to enter. 2 of my friends, who were guys, went in front of me, and I was the third in line to enter the house. The first guy is friend number 1, the second is friend number 2. As we enter, I immediately felt ice cold. I have never felt that kind of cold in my life, as in, I felt it all the way in my bones. As soon as I felt it, I heard friend number 1 scream at the top of his lungs. It all happened so fast that I could barely make out what it looked like inside. I mostly remember an uninviting couch laid across the stairs with the living room to the left of the stairs and the kitchen to the right. It was like walking back in time. Old floral wallpaper peeling off the walls. So the second that friend number 1 screams, we all run out of the house immediately. As I look back toward the entrance, I notice that only friend number 2 exited the house behind me and friend number 1 was still screaming inside. Like blood-curdling, in fear, scream. Friend number 2 runs back into the house and grabs friend number 1 and pulls him out. My first friend was so scared that he ran from the house screaming that something was holding him up by the air by his shirt. He rips off his shirt while he's running, and all I see are 3 big tears in the back of it. It looked as if 3 prongs from a pitchfork had ripped through the fabric. But it doesn't end there. As my second friend stepped foot outside the door, he begins yelling in pain. I looked back, and he had blood dripping all over his face. I literally felt like I was in a horror film. He came toward me, and I was in full instinct mode. I took my sweater off and gave it to him to try and stop the bleeding. He just yelled at me that something had hit him in the nose, and that he needed to get to the hospital. So we run back up the hill, which felt like 1,000 years, to the car. When we get into the car, I get friend number 2 tissues and clean up his nose, and I shine my light on it to see what was bleeding. His right nostril had a clean cut all the way through it, as if someone had taken scissors or shears and cut it. And it gets worse. As we're driving away, my friend and I both look to the house, and there's a candle lit in the top left window. Then, as I look to the other side of the road, I still want to cry when I think about this. I have the image and feeling just burned into me. And there's this old trailer with a light on, and the silhouette of a man with a hat on in the window. I am 100% convinced that this old man was an evil spirit. Just the feeling I got of him staring at me, watching me as I drove by. I still feel the chills when I think about it. I felt like it was a warning to never come back to his property. Like he was the spirit that hurt both of my friends, and that he was sending me a message. On the drive back, we ended up bringing my friend to the nearest ER, where they stopped the bleeding and stitched up his nose. He still has a scar from it, and his right nostril looks as if it were dog-eared from where it split apart through the stitches when it healed. When I was like 13, my mom and her boyfriend had to go to the hospital, and no one would be able to get my brother to the bus stop the next morning because they had to stay overnight. So, I got to miss school the next day to take my brother. After I made sure my brother got on the bus, I went home and cleaned and did random stuff like a 13-year-old would do. It was around 11:45 when there was a knock on my door. Thinking it was the mailman or a neighbor or something, I opened the door and said hello. There was this kid. He couldn't have been much older than me at the time, but he had bangs that were covering his eyes, which I found weird because it was like 107 degrees out. So this kid was super still. Like, I thought that one of my friends put a mannequin there and ran away or something. But then it spoke. It sounded like a robot or something. It was like it was programmed to say this. My mother said to ask someone for a phone in fear that I get lost. Do you have a phone? At this point, I was crapping my pants because 1, I'm a 13-year-old girl, and this older boy was dressed like a burglar and at my door with half his face covered. 2, for some reason, I just couldn't look away. I felt like if I moved or said anything other than yes, that I would explode. And 3, I saw two other boys around the same age standing in my driveway dressed exactly the same way as the one in front of me. Baggy jeans, dark hoodie, and scruffed up Vans. I began to stutter and shake my head. It was the only thing I could do. I finally got out a no and then started to close my door, but he put his foot in the way. Then the two others started walking up, and I was going, hell no. I grabbed the bat by the door and threatened him. If you don't leave right now, I'll kick your ass and then call the cops. I shouted loud enough so that at least one of my neighbors could hear, I hoped. Now, I was this short girl with SpongeBob pajama pants on. I was in no way intimidating. Then he moved his foot and stepped back into the middle of the other two perfectly. Then the far right one said in the exact same tone of voice as the first, "I'm sorry to bother you. I'll just come again later and ask." Internally, I was planning my funeral. Just as I was about to close the door, the first one smiled and looked up. And that was when I saw that they had black eyes. Then the other two looked up, and they were the same. I was like, nope, and slammed the door shut, then called my neighbor, who was this big-ass 20-something-year-old dude. He ran over and looked for them all around my house, but he said they were gone. When I told my mom all of this, she didn't believe me and said I was lying. Said me, the girl with absolutely no social life, who was afraid of her own shadow, was lying. A year or so ago, when I was 19, I was home alone and my dogs were in the backyard. I was on spring break. My younger brother was at his high school. Both of my parents and my uncle that lives with us were working. It was like early afternoon, 12 p.m. when I woke up and went to make my breakfast and stuff. I was watching a YouTube video while eating my scrambled eggs. I don't remember what the video I was watching was about, but I finished eating and went to sit on the couch for like 10 minutes, and then I had the sudden urge to go to the bathroom. I stood up and took my phone with me and started watching another video, closed the door, started doing my business, and at the same time my phone was at max volume. Then, all of a sudden, clear as day, I heard a woman hum outside the door. It sounded like a lullaby. Once again, clear as day, I heard it. It lasted for like 5 to 7 seconds, and I was dumbfounded. I always believed in spirits, ghosts, etc., but I thought logically at first that it could have been the video I was watching. So I rewound it to make sure. But no, that hum did not come from my video. Then I thought it must have been my mom coming home from work early because she does that sometimes. So I called out to her. I stood up, didn't even finish doing my business, opened the door and called out again to my mom, with no answer. I sat back down. I replayed the video a couple more times and once again made sure that that sound did not come from any video or any noise on my phone. So I finished up, flushed, left the bathroom, and looked around the house, checking to see if my mom had arrived and just didn't hear me calling. But she wasn't home. I checked on my 3 dogs, and they were just laying there like nothing had happened. Then I called my mom on the phone and told her what had occurred. She also believes in spirits and said not to worry. I told my brother, and all he said was, "Bruh." Then I told my dad, who is also a believer of spirits, but he takes a more logical view. Like, he makes sure that nothing natural could have caused it, before telling me if the spirit comes back to tell them to go away and ask for the lottery number. I don't remember when this occurred, but I'm pretty sure I was still 19 when it happened. But one night, I was going to bed. Me and my brother share a room. He's been asleep for a while, and I think it was around 1 a.m. You know, that stage when you're about to fall into deep sleep, but you're still aware of your surroundings. Like you can hear things as if you were awake. So right before I fell into that deep sleep, once again clear as day, I heard the same woman's voice. It wasn't my mother's voice, but this time I heard the voice right next to my ear. It was whispering something to me, but I don't recall what it said. But it was perfectly clear, and it was right next to my ear. I instantly woke up and opened my eyes, but there was no one there. I stayed awake probably for another 30 minutes under my sheets before falling back to sleep. I told my brother and my parents the next day of what I had heard, and my mom said that she would see what she could do. Legit, that was the last time that I heard the spirit. So to this day, I'm trying to remember what the spirit whispered, but I just don't know. I don't know if I had sleep paralysis, but this happened almost a year ago. I was sleeping, and then all of a sudden I heard loud bangs. I don't know if it was gunshots or fireworks. I just know it caught me off guard. And then all of a sudden I felt something hit my spine. I couldn't move my legs or arms. I was sleeping on my right side facing my wall next to the window. I kept my eyes closed and I tried moving, fighting whatever was holding me down. Tried kicking. I didn't yell even though I was about to scream so that my parents could come, but then I started to feel my legs again and kept kicking until I had full control back. I kept my eyes closed and fell asleep. I woke up in the morning, wanting to check and make sure that I didn't catch a bullet, but that only happened to me once. When I was 13 or 14, I was staying in a hostel in Ireland. This hostel was directly next to, supposedly, one of the most haunted places in Ireland, an abandoned mansion. In fact, the hostel was built from the bricks of the mansion. There was a story that a widow cursed someone in there, and when they died, they remained. After hearing this, being a young and dumb kid, I decided to taunt the ghost. Big mistake. Nothing happened after I taunted the ghost until I went to bed. That night, in the very right side of my bed, I heard light breathing. I paid it no mind because I've had experiences before and breathing was not a huge alarm for me. I eventually fell asleep, and then I got a phone call on my phone at 3 to 5 a.m. Likely family from back home in the US. I didn't answer the call, and I tried to go back to sleep, but there was a problem. My comforter had fallen off the bed, to the right side of the bed, and the breathing was loud and raspy now. At this point I was frightened because I had never heard breathing that loudly before, and it just wouldn't stop. Needless to say, I didn't get my comforter out of fear, and it was a good thing that I didn't. In the morning, I was shocked by what I saw. To the right of my bed was the comforter laying on the ground, and it looked as if there was a human underneath it. I could make out the arms, legs, and head. To this day, I genuinely believe that if I had reached for my comforter, something would have reached back. While going through a tough time in my relationship, I decided to move in with my mom for a few months for a break from the chaos. A guy I had met through a mutual friend of ours offered to pick me up in his truck and take us for a drive through the mountain trails behind my mother's house. Bored out of my mind with TV and food, I agreed. He arrived, I got in. We drove to the top of the ridge at the beginning of one of the trails where we stopped to roll up really quick. 5 or 10 minutes later, we were slowly driving along, listening to music, talking, laughing, realizing that we had actually been neighbors years before. The song on the truck radio was changing, and there began a softer song. We could hear the wind blowing quietly through the trees, and all of a sudden, there was a whisper. "She's with him," the voice said, extremely clearly. I did not know what to do. I mean, What were they talking about? And even more importantly, who were they? We continued to drive down a trail a bit longer because my guy friend said it would be bad not to show dominance to whatever it was and not to run scared, ever. But it was, in fact, the scariest moment of my life. I should clarify also that this is in the middle of nowhere in the middle of nowhere. My mom has no neighbors for miles. Hunters are allowed on the property, but none were in the area. We shined headlights in the direction of the whisper, and there was nothing. This story takes place during the late summer in the 1960s in Iowa in a very small farming community. My friend's great-grandpa, Bob, owned a farm out there. He had acres of corn, wheat, potatoes, etc., but corn was his main crop, so he had a huge cornfield. It was around 2 a.m., and his grandfather couldn't sleep, so he went outside to get some fresh air. While outside, he noticed something that looked like a child walking around in the cornfield. So Bob ran back inside and grabbed his double-barrel shotgun and woke the farmhand for backup. They combed through the cornfield in an attempt to find whatever was running around out there. After a while, they still couldn't find anything, so Bob told the farmhand to go back inside the house while he stayed on the porch to watch his cornfield. Then, as he looks at the gravel road between his yard and the fence line that led to the cornfield, standing on the road was a little girl around 6 years old or so, and she was wearing a white dress that made her look like she had just gotten out of church. Bob thought that his mind must have been playing tricks on him, so he tried to lay down on the couch to rest, but also stay somewhat alert. However, not even a minute after he laid down, he heard a knock on the screen door. He walked up to the door and slightly cracked the main door open. He saw the little girl and asked, "May I help you?" The little girl said, "Mister, I'm lost, and I don't know where my parents are. Can I come in the house and use your telephone?" Bob felt uneasy, and told her that he could get her a glass of water and that he can call her parents for her if she gave him the number, but he didn't feel comfortable allowing her in his home. He felt something off about the little girl. However, the little girl insisted to be the one to call and talk to them. And Bob said, "Young lady, it's 2 a.m, and I don't feel right letting a stranger into the house, little girl or not." The little girl started to get agitated and said, "I'm not leaving until you let me in to use your phone." Startled, Bob told the little girl that he was going to call the police to come pick her up so that they could keep her safe and find her parents. He closed the door to go and call the police, and he heard someone punch the door like a grown man. He walked back and cracked the door open again, but when he looked, he realized that it was still the little girl, and that she was the one who had punched the door. But when he looked at her this time, she didn't have any eyes. Instead, she had pitch black orbs instead of eyes, and she said in a deep voice, "Let me in." Bob grabbed his shotgun and pointed it at the little girl and told her no and to go away. After this, the little girl looked right into the barrel and then back up at Bob, smiled smugly at him, and giggled before she ran back into the cornfield and disappeared. My family lives near a very large conference center in northeast Georgia. Due to COVID-19, the conference center has been shuttered and abandoned since May. This is a sprawling property with over 900 acres of forest, lake, and wilderness with a few large hotels and a dining room, auditorium, etc. It's been around for about 50 to 60 years, although my family has only been in the area since the 90s. My girlfriend and I decided to explore the property, since it's been abandoned for months now. The entrance is very securely gated. There's no way to get past the front gates without a bulldozer, so we walked through the woods, leaving the car at the top. We walked through the parking lots to make sure that no one else was there. The location is very remote, so it would be extremely unlikely that anyone would visit on foot, especially in the middle of the night on Thanksgiving. We got access through an upper exterior door, and we started poking around the main hotel. It was completely abandoned, but left in good condition. It was spooky, as the only lighting came from the red glow of the emergency exit signs. We looked in many of the other rooms, and everything seemed neat and orderly, like guests could check in at any moment. We reached the main lobby, and then we both heard it, and froze. We simultaneously heard what sounded like a music box playing deep within one of the halls. Neither of us believe in the paranormal, but we both froze dead in our tracks and looked at each other, our faces confirming that we were both terrified. We bolted as fast as we could through the upper door, making sure that it closed securely behind us, and fled on foot. The music 100% sounded like it was coming from a music box, but it was also vaguely metallic, almost like it was a different frequency than most music. Due to the way that it sounded, we ruled out that it could be a forgotten cell phone or a computer. This was not any type of alert or notification made by an electronic device. There's also no cell phone service out there. Usually, I can find a logical explanation for paranormal phenomena, as I'm admittedly skeptical about it. However, I cannot figure out for the life of me what that music could have been. There was no one else on the property. There were absolutely no signs of squatters, and there's no music boxes in the hotel rooms. They are all intentionally identical, so there would have been one in every room. Does anyone have any insight on this? We were genuinely terrified, but now I'm regretting not investigating further. I was home alone on Thanksgiving. It was 2015 around evening time, and I heard some knocking. Being in a festive and playful spirit, I opened the door without looking, and automatically felt a deep sense of regret, sort of like a literal, oh shit, moment. I didn't know where it was coming from until I actively started trying to place what was wrong with the situation, and that's when I realized they didn't have any whites in their eyes. For a second I thought, isn't Halloween over? And was confused until the oldest boy made eye contact with me. And that's literally when I felt like I was staring death in the face. They wanted to come in, and the way they spoke made it seem like they knew what I was thinking and were actively mocking my helplessness. I slammed the door on them, turned all my lights on, and started watching TV while they stood outside and would occasionally knock. I felt like I lost a good 6 hours of time because I don't even remember when I fell asleep or what I was last watching. I remember when I first sat down, Gabriel Iglesias was playing, but I don't remember anything. When I woke up, it was around 2 a.m., and the lights were all off, and there was only static on the TV. I have Dish Network, and there were no power outages in my area, and I don't get static if Dish were to go out. I would get a channel listed as an HDMI and a black screen, or it would be the introduction screen where it would show two people talking about the features of Dish Network. Also, if the lights went out, they would come back on. I had to literally switch the lights on and off a few times for it to work, but no one was home. After that, I would occasionally see them outside, and every time it would be pin drop silence, and my lights would occasionally go out or something would lose power like my dish. One time my phone that was at 63% dropped to 1% in 5 minutes. After a few months of being afraid of every knock, I decided to call an imam to bless the house. I also saged the house and brought a lot of different surahs, psalms, to put in every room, including the bathrooms. Since then, the visits have stopped. However, a few months after that, I remember hearing a blood-curdling scream and a banging sound on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. A few months ago, maybe 2 or so, my mom and I heard a banging coming from the front door, and same thing. No one was there. I don't know if it was them, or something coming back, or just kids playing a prank, but I was so terrified. Not very far from my home, there is an abandoned place, which is my hideout. I honestly don't know what was in the place before it became abandoned. The place is a rather small, probably like 40 by 20 meter fenced off, overgrown field with just one building. I can't tell what the building is either. It's a really small, house-like place with no windows and one locked door. The field itself has a small, short sidewalk that has been taken over by nature. There's also a small hill in the field. You can tell that the place hasn't been visited for a really long time, because the grass in there is quite overgrown, and the house, fence, and path all have plants growing all over the place. Since it's currently spring, a lot of the foliage is growing and blooming, and there were some wildflowers in the area as well. Today I took some scissors and went to the area with the intent of picking some flowers to make a cute bouquet to put in my home. As soon as I entered the area, something felt off, and I suddenly became paranoid. I ignored the feelings, since I have mental illness which causes me to have random paranoia at times. Keep in mind, though, that it doesn't cause hallucinations. It was still unusual for me to feel paranoid there, because I would usually go there to relax and be calm. It's basically my safe spot. I went on to look around and pick some flowers, but then I heard some footstep-like noises behind me everywhere that I went. I brushed it off again, assuming that it could have been an insect or a small animal like a hedgehog or a rabbit. I felt like I was being watched the entire time, but again, I assumed that it was just my random paranoia. The thing that scared me the most happened when I was about to cut a big, white, pretty flower. The only one of its kind in the whole area. As I was kneeling down to cut it, I suddenly felt a human presence behind me. This caused me to jump up, drop my bouquet out of shock, and yell out, "Whoa!" and turn around. To my surprise, nothing was there. I was very confused, since the presence felt awfully real. I picked up my bouquet and went home. So it was around May of this year when I was playing hide and seek with my family. When the game started, I went to the basement. But after a couple minutes, I was about to be spotted, so I moved to the bathroom, but went backwards into the bathroom. Keep in mind, I was facing the doorway, and that is when it started. When I heard the groans, I froze. They didn't sound human, so I knew it wasn't one of my family members. A couple of minutes went by, and I could still hear the groans, but built up the courage to run out of the bathroom. A couple of more minutes went by. I could still hear the groans, and I had to build up the courage to run from the bathroom. That's all I have to share. If you could explain what happened, then that would be great. My great-grandmother died in that house. It was built in the 1940s, and that basement bathroom was built very poorly. A couple of years ago, me and some friends had a short-lived phase of trying to go and explore as many cool, abandoned places as we could. One of these was a very old hospital that had been closed for roughly 20 to 30 years, I believe. It was pretty central, in a big town, so it was quite regularly maintained as far as terms of boarding up windows, doors, etc. to keep people out. Our first visit started with us climbing through a window near the middle of the building. We pried a plyboard board up from the window, but as soon as me and 3 other friends got in that room and opened the door into the main hallway, we agreed pretty quickly that we shouldn't be there and left. Unusual for us, as we quite clearly weren't scared of much if we were easily able to break and enter into a building in the middle of town. We'd also never been scared and anxious of anywhere before, and it's weird that all of us agreed that we should leave straight away. Our second visit is where it got properly weird. We went back about 2 weeks later, and all of the plyboard on the windows was replaced with metal sheets, which isn't strange for a building in a large town where people break in regularly, apart from the fact that the window that we went through originally was completely open. We climbed through anyway, and got all the same feelings again, except when we tried to open the door into the hallway. It was locked, and felt as if something was pushed up against the other side of it. We went back through the window, and I was last. As I was about halfway out of the window, I heard a young girl's laugh, pretty much directly behind me in this small room, and I nearly fell out of the window trying to get away from it. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me at first, until one of my friends asked if I had heard that laugh, and that's why I jumped through this window. All my other friends had heard it too, and said it sounded like it had come from inside the room. All of this is pretty normal stuff, and I'm sure that the door being locked or having something behind it was just someone moving stuff around inside if them and their friends were exploring too. The young girl's laugh that we all heard from the room we were in, and how we felt on both visits, is what we can't explain. I am right now sitting on my front porch, smoking a cigarette. I cannot bring myself to go back inside my house. There is someone in there. Just over 2 months ago, I moved into a new house after losing nearly everything to COVID. I won't go into details or draw this out. Typing this out makes my eyes well, and every hair on my body stands straight up, but damn it, I saw a human-shaped shadow in my walk-in closet. Am I going crazy? Maybe, but I know that I am not at the same time. This is what happened. I was laying on my bed browsing Reddit, and from the corner of my eye, I caught movement coming from my closet. Within literal milliseconds, I turn and see someone standing inside of it, looking right at me. I flipped out, sprung up, ran out of my room, slammed the door, and grabbed a kitchen knife. I yelled and screamed about calling police, that I had a knife, and basically acted like a scared monkey. No response. After about a minute of yelling and screaming, and realizing that I had left my phone in my bedroom to call 911, I slowly peeked in. There was simply nothing there. Nothing. No one could have gone anywhere. I am pissed and terrified about this. I saw this person. I saw their shape, their movement, their arms. There was a humanoid figure in my closet, and that is all I know. Last night, my boyfriend went into the room next to our bedroom to play video games while I watched Parks and Rec on my phone on low volume in bed. After an hour or so, he ran in and asked, "Is everything okay?" I stared blankly at him. "Yeah? Why?" He then said he'd heard someone wailing, loudly, and that it sounded like my voice. It couldn't have been Parks and Rec, because I wasn't watching an episode with any sound in it like that, not to mention that the volume was too low to be heard in the other room. It couldn't have been me because I was just chilling. Additionally, I had not heard any wailing sound at all. He said he'd heard it through his gaming headphones a couple of times, wasn't quite sure what it was, took them off, heard it a third time clearly, and then came to check on me. This is strange because a few nights before, I was feeling incredibly ill with severe chills to the point where I couldn't leave the blankets to get more blankets. I was calling for help, and he heard nothing through his headphones. They're pretty good at canceling outside noise, plus he plays the game music at high volume. So who was the wailing woman?